his main criticism was going to focus solely on the criterion, these rules that were being laid out by this, like 1, 2, 3, whatever. He only got to rule 1, couldn't establish any categories, and now he's trying to switch over to some other concern about some other thing instead of focusing on the list that he had said. He couldn't even establish point 1. If you can't argue against the point 1 in the fucking list, you're done. All right, so I've got literally 2 more videos to go through, and I've been streaming for like Jesus over 4 hours now, and it's very early in the morning. I'm going to try to get through both of them, but I might speed through it just a little bit to try and make sure that the stream doesn't go on for like more than 5 hours. But the next video that I'm going to pull up is Jordan Peterson, and this kind of goes through to the same theme of what's been this stream tonight, right? Because Walsh was talking about, you know, children getting butchered and stuff. Shapiro has been beating on the same drum. Now we're going to see Peterson talking about it, and let's see if Peterson, our good old buddy, has any better insight than what the other two have said, because Walsh and Shapiro are just right-wing hacks, right? Shapiro supposedly is an intellectual. I mean, he just came off as a total moron. Peterson is definitely supposed to be like an intellectual of the right. So let's see if he has any better insight into these issues.
Weeks. It's June 16th, 2022, by the way. Writing a couple of articles for the Telegraph.
God, he's so
one
boring.
Of which I'm going to read to you today, called Butchers and Liars. We are sacrificing our children on the altar of a malicious far-left ideology.
Is he going to back that up with anything? He's like, we're sacrificing our children on the altar of a far-left ideology. What fucking altar? Like, I wish that, because oh my God, he's going to be all metaphorical the entire time, and he'll never say things directly. So we're going to have to like basically just keep analogizing whatever he's fucking saying. So when he says the altar of far left ideology, I think he means like the very fact that we recognize that people can self-identify, that people can recognize truths about themselves. Somehow that must be an altar that we're sacrificing them on. Because, you know, they just die when they have a revelation about themselves.
The medical profession is crumbling in response to radical transgender activists.
Hey, that's me, radical transgender but wait, I'm not doing anything to crumble medicine, though. Like, I think the medical institution is doing perfectly fine. In fact, I think pharmaceuticals are making a lot of money off my ass.
There's good evidence that many ancient societies sacrificed children to their gods. Parents in ancient Phoenician colonies in Carthage, Sicily, Sardinia, and Malta slew their offspring prior to cremating them, hoping that the gods would hear their voices and bless them. We are rightly appalled by this, though sometimes I wonder whether we understand child sacrifice far more than we'd like to admit.
What the fuck? He's talking about like trans people, and he's talking about like immediately out the gate of like, oh, he sacrificed it. I thought he was gonna be metaphorical, but then he goes right into like literal, like in ancient societies, they used to like sacrifice their kids and in order to please their gods. And I think that we're more familiar. I'm like, wait, hold on. You mean like literal child sacrifice? Like, holy shit. He literally, that coma really fucked him up.
I saw a video the other day featuring an American surgeon bragging that he had performed more than 3,000 double mastectomies on young women who had paid for gender reassignment.
Okay, so he's basically talking about like, yeah, he's pretty proud of his job, that, you know, he's got a lot of work. He's helped a lot of people that, you know, want to live a happier, healthier life. And part of that includes removing the that tissue. What's the issue? What would you say, like, oh my God, I saw this other doctor and he was talking about he's done like 2,000 or 3,000 Botox injections. It's just disgusting. It's so awful. Or what about doctors that perform circumcision? Would you be like, oh my God, this doctor is like, oh, I deliver all these babies and I've cut off like thousands of portions of penises at this point. The God of David would be very pleased with me. Haha. Do you think like doctors like, I don't imagine the type of person that he's talking about is talking about it in the same way that he says bragging about it. It's like, I mean, I don't know. It depends on how good he is at his job. And if he's being referenced for something, if they're like, this is the best, a double mastectomy doctor. Yeah, I think he'd probably be proud of that. I mean, a lot of sciencey types are usually like pretty proud of their accomplishments, right?
Individuals confused, one might say encouraged, by those who profit from it into believing that their adolescent emotional trials can be cured and happiness reign forever if they subject themselves to this brutal practice.
No, we're never going to be like happiness. It's never going to reign in our world because people like you exist doing the thing that you're doing, where just getting healthcare and helping us like so that our outer body matches who we are on the inside, so that we're more comfortable with ourselves. You would say like, this is abuse. This is like, people should not be doing this. The same type of thing that Shapiro said, except instead of like talking about the beginning portions of it, like going and talking to a psychologist or whatever, you're trying to just conflate all of these different professions together all at once. You're trying to say the social transition, going and talking to psychologists, psychiatrists, the years of waiting for puberty blockers, then getting on puberty blockers, waiting for another several years until you start HRT, then presumably after you start HRT, eventually you might go and get some surgeries done. I don't think for 2 seconds that he has any nuance here to recognize all these different doctors, all these different professions. Instead, he's trying to just make it sound, once again, being anti-intellectual here, as if every single one of these medical fields are all the same. All these doctors are just the same like group of people that are all glad-handing one another just so they can profit off of some child's misery.
And it is brutal, a process that often includes not only the aforementioned mastectomies, but other appalling surgical processes. Orchiectomy, that's castration in blunter language, the removal of the uterus, the demolition of the musculature of the forearm to make what is not a penis, but must be referred to as such.
He is just so fucking jealous that very clearly he has been at like a swimming pool and saw like a trans man walk by in his Chad Speedo, and Peterson got so insecure that he's like, that'll never be a penis. Just so you know, that might be a metaphorical penis, but to me, it will never be anything other than your forearm. Meanwhile, the other dude was like hung like a fucking forearm.
All of that, for someone purporting to be a physician to perform this on children, to me at least, seems like something worthy of a prison sentence.
Oh, so now he wants to lock up doctors.
Whatever happened to the doctrine expressed by the ancient language as primum non nocere? First, do no harm. The Hippocratic Oath has been replaced by a delusion, a belief that can be summarized as, by blocking the puberty of children and then surgically altering them, we are only restoring what is theirs by right. A child's feelings are the final arbiters of their reproductive destiny, and any attempt to contest their gender identity risks increasing their proclivity for suicide. Lies.
So we had Marjorie Taylor Greene in the very first segment saying that that trans people are terrorists, so trans terrorists. We saw Mark Burns talking about that not only should all LGBT people be rounded up and shot, that our families should be as well. And now we have Jordan Peterson here, who's now advocating for doctors that would give us healthcare ought to be locked up and imprisoned. So when we looked at the 9 steps toward genocide, I mean, this is like we're right in that 7 to 8 area, because more and more often you're going to see right wingers talk about imprisoning us, murdering us, or basically blaming us for being murdered or killed by people. It's just an unfortunate thing that is going to happen in their rhetoric.
Lies. Lies. Then, butchery.
You know, it's always good faith when you describe surgery, like modern surgery, as just butchery, because, you know, it's the exact same thing. When you go to, you know, get any surgery done, like if you get a skin tag removed off of you, they basically just butchered you. You know, they're removing a healthy part of your body off of you. How dare you get rid of that little dangly bit of skin?
Changing standards. Psychologists, those in my own personal field of medicine, have also surrendered to this groupthink. The American Psychological Association's Task Force on Guidelines for Psychological Practice with Transgender and Gender Nonconforming People, TGNC, insist that psychologists and other professional counselors offer trans-affirmative care, starting with such niceties as displaying TGNC affirmative resources in.
Yeah, just so you know, this right here, by the way, is so funny. It's so, like, once again, anti-intellectual, right? The ironic thing, though, is he's like, oh, the people within my own profession. So it's the consensus of the people within his profession all think one thing, and he thinks the other thing. And he's like, I'm smarter. I know the truth better than they do. To keep in mind, he's saying that, you know, on the package of toothpaste, the other 9 dentists that have the consensus that you should use toothpaste, he's saying those dentists are wrong, and he's the one dentist, you know, the 9 out of 10, he's the 1 out of 10 that's telling you not to use toothpaste. Okay, that's what's going on in this situation, and he gets to redefine all these terms, like surgery is now butchery, affirming care is abuse. Like, he's just doing this this thing, like he's playing a shell game with these terminology and stuff like that. And yeah, he's using a Mott and Bailey fallacy, where he has the actual position that he claims, which is he's about reasonable psychology, and he's just concerned about like science and that sort of thing, when in actuality he's just using that to protect his actual position, which is he just does not want trans people to get any type of health care.
In waiting areas. Practitioners are also asked to examine how their language, e.g., use of incorrect pronouns and names, may reinforce the gender binary in overt or subtle and unintentional ways.
That's self-evident, and it's blatantly obvious. Like, I don't see what he's saying, and he's like mocking in a tone, and he's like little smirk and stuff while he's saying it. I don't see, like, what is the point? Like, we know this. Like, it would be, I don't know. He's saying it like it's a gotcha, when there's like literally nothing that he has said or that we would say that would contradict that. Like, I don't that's not even a controversial point. If you misgender somebody, yeah, it hurts them. Just like if somebody were to misgender him constantly, I'm sure he would be upset about that as well.
These guidelines first read like a manual of indoctrination written by Marxist ideologues. And
now, once again, the same thing that Shapiro was doing, where he has to continuously conflate all of the things that he doesn't like. So he has to conflate trans people with some type of agenda or ideology because it sounds scary. Then whatever the made up agenda is that he's just arbitrarily decided is, now he's going to conflate that with Marxism, communism, whatever other isms that he's going to throw in there to make sure that his audience is like really frightened about whatever the fuck he's talking about, even though, like, I don't know if he even knows what he's going on about now. How the fuck is transgender people, how are we tied to like communism, other than like a lot of you know, woo cat girls tend to be leftists?
Second, like a document designed to undermine and destroy the practice of therapy itself.
Now the transes are going to destroy the concept of therapy itself. Even though it's kind of weird that he was complaining about it earlier, because he's like, oh, it changed. And it's like, Yeah, science changes as it gets better and more accurate information to keep updated. The models that it's built, including the models of therapy and healthcare and best practices, change as well, and it did for transgender healthcare. He just doesn't like it.
But at an alarming rate, these guidelines have transformed themselves into punitive laws governing what a psychologist or counselor may say and think in relation to their clients.
No, it's just what they may say about their clients, right? It's your behaviors that's the concerning thing. You can think whatever the fuck you want to. Nobody knows what you're thinking, Peterson. I mean, like, I would assume if people had like telepathy and they could like talk back and forth, if somebody tried to communicate with you, their brain would just be like short out and fried by all the constant whirlwind of rattling information that's just kind of like nonsensically shooting through your head as like a whirlwind of like communism, Marxism, transgender, and just all the chaos of utter destruction that cat girls have caused you.
Let me make myself perfectly clear. Speaking as a professional, whether in America, Britain, or anywhere, it is not the place.
Speaking as a professional, anywhere, like, okay.
Place of a therapist to affirm or conversely to deny the identity of anyone whom they admit into their care. People come to see a therapist often after long and painful deliberation because they are suffering, confused, or both.
Yeah, suffering and confused, or both. And a lot of the reasons why people are suffering or they're confused is because of people like you and the propaganda that you spread.
The job of that therapist is to listen, to question, and to proceed with due caution, neither providing cheap advice and thereby stealing their clients' successes or heaping failure upon them, nor assuming special knowledge of the proper outcome for a given individual.
Now, bullshit. There is prognosis when it comes to mental, like when you go into therapy, there are general goals that you have. Like if you're depressed, the goal is to be less depressed. If you're anxious, the goal is to be less anxious. Like what the fuck happened to you while you were in that fucking coma, dude? Holy shit.
There is simply no way I would ever tell a 15-year-old adolescent that she is absolutely correct if sometimes she feels more masculine than feminine, however that feeling might emerge, and that if she feels that surgery is the answer, then recommend hormones.
Wait, he said that I'm going to tell her that she can't feel more masculine and more feminine at times. That absolutely fucking can. And it happens all the time. Like that's a normal thing. People are like, I feel like more masculine today, or I might feel more feminine or whatever. However, whatever that means to them, that's not an issue. But he had to take it a step further to be like, oh, and she wants to have surgery, because that's like his only go-to. Like for whatever reason, he's just obsessed with thinking that like every single young trans person just automatically gets access to surgery. And guess what? There wouldn't be a need to defend trans healthcare or a need for it near as much and the desperate disarray that it is if it wasn't for people like you, Peterson.
That day, I would instead spend many weeks, even perhaps many months or years, listening to her unwrap her story, using caution as my watchword.
Yeah, that's done already. That's called socially transitioning. That's usually done from, like 5 to like 10 or 11 before they get on puberty blockers. Then after puberty blockers, they wait until they're about like 15 or 16 before they start HRT. So yeah, from like 5 years old to like 15 years old, yeah, you got like 10 years to talk with them about this stuff. I mean, that seems like a more than reasonable amount of time, and that's standard care.
And help her to come to some thorough and well-developed understanding of both her autobiographical history and her destiny. That is not...
How does she have a destiny if you said that there was no goal? You don't start out a therapy, in his own words, you don't start off a therapy with a goal in the end, but he's going to use a word like fucking destiny now.
Affirmation, and neither is it denial. How could I possibly dare to do either when someone has come to me because they are mixed up and desperate, a state of twinned experience indicating a profound confusion about identity itself?
This is a huge heap of irony coming from the guy that spent an hour arguing with Sam Harris that he could not define what the word truth meant. Truth of something to be true. Peterson said that it was just not possible. Okay. And he's going to say that he's going to criticize someone else for having questions about their identity. What a fucking joke.
Radical new guidelines. I am focusing on the American Psychological Association, APA, because it is the body charged with establishing the norms and ideals for clinical practice in the most populous democracy on earth. Principles that will and are spread around the West more broadly, including in Britain. Some of their guidelines are appalling enough to deserve dissection. Guideline 1. Psychologists understand that gender is a non-binary construct that allows for a range of gender identities and that a person's gender identity may not align with sex.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. Like, we just flatly know it's self-evident. There are people walking around that have gender identities and they express gender in a way that would not match the what you would think of as their biological sex. So that's just flatly true. So I know the word true and facts trigger you a little bit, Peterson, but just relax. Just relax, okay? There's nothing you can do to argue this. It is true. Assigned
at birth. I don't understand this radical postmodern definition.
Right, but see, that's the problem. Right there. I don't understand this radical postmodern definition. He doesn't. He literally does not have a definition for truth. Okay, he can't understand it, and all he's ever going to say is he's going to play dumb continuously. And when he says this postmodern, whatever. All right, put that aside. He's using postmodern as a catch-all. There are lots of different ideas within postmodern. There's postmodern art. There's postmodern architecture. It makes no sense to say, I don't understand this postmodern definition. Like, we gave you, there's a perfectly modern definition of it as well, but he doesn't want to accept that either.
Of gender, one that rests on a person's deeply felt or inherent sense of being one sex over another, regardless of biology.
I'm glad that he's not a biologist, but he feels so comfortable making those statements. When he's like, I disagree with the majority of people that are actually in my field of expertise. So the majority of the experts in the field that he's a part of, he is the tiny, tiny, tiny minority in this, yelling at them, you're all wrong. But then whenever it comes to sex, as part of it, he's trying to argue a biological component, he just skips right over it. He's like, oh, this is just true. Okay. Yeah, sure. There are some traits that you could describe as being biological, and some of those might be true, but a collection of those traits does not make a category of it true. So I just want to point out the reason why this is important is he's relying on biological essentialism here, but he cannot give the trait, and neither can any motherfucker that claims that biological essentialism is true. None of them can give the essential trait that makes a category true. And in order for that category to be true, the essential trait would have to be something that is exclusive to that category and does not appear in other categories. Otherwise, what you have is a collection of traits that creates a model of a person, right? That person's sex you can model by you looking at all the individual traits that make that up. But because any individual trait can appear in any category, that means that each person would have a unique model of sex onto themselves. And in order to establish some type of binary, you're just not going to be able to do it. The best thing that you could have is a spectrum of sex traits. Then all you can say is that this person has whatever collection of those different sex traits. And you could say, like, well, on average, we might look and say, well, this is a masculine trait, or this is a neutral trait, or this trait isn't assigned. But why even assign those traits like a gendered aspects in the first place? Why not just say these are the traits that this person's body has, and then move the fuck on? And the very fact that nobody can offer these essential traits, even though they insist that this category must exist and it must be true, they want to do shit like this and just hand wave and go, well, it's just some postmodern thing and I don't really know. Yeah, okay, fuck off. The reason why he doesn't want to say it is because he can't define it. He doesn't know his own definition.
Psychologically, it is indisputably the case that a non-trivial proportion of males have a feminine temperament, which essentially means that they experience higher levels of negative emotion, such as anxiety and the analogs of pain, grief, frustration, disappointment, depression, and are more agreeable, compassionate, polite, than typical males, and equally true that a non-trivial proportion of females have a masculine temperament. But this does not change how, objectively, professionals should measure a person's gender.
That's not, no, like he literally just admitted what I said, where he was saying that, yeah, sure, the traits that he would associate as being male can appear in females, and traits that he would say ought to appear in females can also appear in males. Once again, the traits are ubiquitous. All right, every trait can appear across any category that he tries to create. That's why he cannot establish firmly of what makes a woman and what makes a man. He can't do it. And instead, he says, well, we can objectively define gender. Okay, well, if he can't even come up with the categories that he wants to use, then I don't see how he could say we can objectively measure things regarding what? Regarding the categories that you can't establish. That's a problem, Peterson.
Psychologists once cared if measurement followed standard practices of validity and reliability.
It does. The system that they come up with now, all right, the sex, gender, and sexual orientation spectrum answers it perfectly. And within their system, that system, it's all has continuity. It works perfectly fine. Trans people exist in it. Cis people exist. All these different identities exist within it with no problem, no contradictions. It's only because your system cannot account for the existence of trans people and the existence of non-binary people and the existence of agender people, because you can't account for it within the system, the categories that you can't even define. You're just going to hand wave it and say, this just must not be true. That's your fucking problem, not our problem, and not the problem of the very institutions that you're trying to criticize.
Try reading, for example, a document published by the APA itself in 2014.
No, we're done. I'm done with this. I'm moving on to a different video, because his main criticism was going to focus solely on the criterion, these rules that were being laid out by this, like 1, 2, 3, whatever. He only got to rule 1, couldn't establish any categories, and now he's trying to switch over to some other concern about some other thing instead of focusing on the list that he had said. He couldn't even establish point 1. If you can't argue against the point 1 in the fucking list, you're done. Their rules, the little outline, the guidelines themselves. This man was just beat by a set of fucking guidelines. Like, if I was going to do a video and he wrote this down, this is his article that he wrote. Okay, if I sat down and I wrote an article and I'm like, I'm going to refute something that Peterson says or something that whoever says, and I'm doing this extemporaneous, right? If I actually sat down to write it out, I would make sure that if I said point number 1, I at least would feel like I could refute point number 1, and instead of just say, I don't understand this postmodern Marxist trans agenda interpretation of, sex, gender, and because I don't understand it, I don't have a way to criticize it, but I also have nothing to offer to argue against it. I have no categories of my own. I'm not going to provide this, and now I'm just going to move on to something else besides this list. This is an embarrassment. Like, this right here, I cannot believe that this guy is considered like an intellectual heavyweight on the right-wing side. Fuck this. You're not going to sit here and tell me that you're going to debunk this entire thing with your article. Then you're going to fucking stumble and trip on your dick on the very first portion of it. Just ridiculous.
Tell me pretty lies, look me in the face, tell me that you love me, even if it's fake.